Why did only 1 in every 5 members of Flak crews survive World War II? How did the anti-aircraft cannon become the most feared tank killer on the battlefield? How did it manage to bring down hundreds of Allied bombers? And why was its fire control system disturbingly ahead of its time when it first appeared? You're about to hear all that and more through the intense story of the infamous 88. Let's get into it. Back in the early 1930s, Germany was secretly rearming at full speed, despite the Treaty of Versailles strictly banning the development of tanks, aircraft, artillery, and other heavy weapons. But behind the scenes, under a web of cover-up operations, the Germans were doing exactly that. World War I had already proven that aircraft weren't going anywhere. By the 1930s, air power was evolving fast, and the threat wasn't just small reconnaissance planes or dogfighters anymore. Strategic bombers were on the rise, flying higher than small arms could reach, carrying payloads powerful enough to flatten entire city blocks. Germany knew what that meant. They needed something new to defend themselves against this growing threat. Engineers at Krupp were given a tall order to create a brand new high-velocity cannon with serious firepower. After countless trials and errors, they came up with what would soon become legendary, the 8.8-centimeter Flak 18. Now, Flak is short for Flugabwehrkanone, which literally means anti-aircraft cannon in German. But the word Flak would take on a life of its own. Even today, people say things like, "I got a lot of flak for doing that," referring to the heavy anti-aircraft fire that Allied pilots feared so much. The 88, as it was simply called, was built to fire high-velocity, time-fused shells designed to explode at a set altitude, raining deadly metal fragments down on enemy bombers. A direct hit could obliterate any plane in the sky, while a near miss could shred wings, rip through engines, or tear open cockpits, making it almost impossible for a bomber to stay airborne. It was fast, accurate, and powerful. The 88 could rotate and elevate quickly in all directions to track fast-moving targets, thanks to its advanced cruciform carriage. It could elevate from -3 degrees to +85 degrees, which turned out to be incredibly useful later, especially when it started aiming at ground targets. But we'll get to that soon. The gun weighed about 7 tons and required a crew of 10 men to operate. It was designed to be towed by a truck or half-track, giving it the mobility needed for Germany's lightning-fast blitzkrieg tactics. A well-trained crew could even fire directly from its wheels in emergencies. But as the war dragged on and started turning against Germany, Flak crews changed drastically. They were no longer the elite soldiers they once were. By the later stages of the war, they were made up of old men, wounded veterans, teenage boys, and even women, especially in communication and radar roles. Over 1.2 million people served in the Luftwaffe's anti-aircraft defense arm, nearly half of the entire force. And here's where the genius of German engineering really shows. Much like many other German weapons of the time, everything around the 88 was designed for maximum effectiveness in combat. They didn't realize it yet, but they had just created arguably the best gun of the Second World War. It didn't take long before it saw combat. A few units were sent to Spain with the German Expeditionary Force during the Spanish Civil War for real-world testing. The results were so impressive that the High Command took notice. Very soon, the 88 was declared the best anti-aircraft weapon available. But no one fully grasped just what they had on their hands, or the many roles it would soon take on. You see, on the battlefield, you never know what situation you might face. And during the Spanish Civil War, the 80s were used against anything that needed to be destroyed. Aircraft, bunkers, infantry positions, and, most interestingly, tanks. Back then, tanks barely had enough armor to stop small arms fire, let alone withstand a high-velocity anti-aircraft shell. A single hit from an 88 would ruin their day instantly. However, that was only the beginning. Once the Second World War erupted a few years later, everything changed. By the time 1939 rolled around, Germany entered World War II with just over 2,600 flak guns. That was twice as many as Britain had, while the United States had almost none at all. Germany's prediction about needing such a weapon was absolutely right. Over the course of the war, they would produce more than 21,000 units of different versions of the 88. But as the numbers went up, so did the human cost. Crews operating these guns paid an enormous price. As the war evolved, so did the 88. The Flak 36 was introduced, a refined model featuring a multi-section barrel that was easier to replace when worn out, a redesigned cruciform carriage known as the Lafette 36 for faster setup, and even a steel shield to protect the crew from enemy small arms fire and shrapnel. Other small ergonomic tweaks made it easier to handle and maintain under pressure. The barrel itself was lengthened, and new shells with larger propellant cases gave the gun an even higher muzzle velocity. Then came the Flak 37, featuring even more precise targeting instruments and, most importantly, a cutting-edge data transmission system that connected every gun in a battery to a central fire control unit. This is where the 88 truly became legendary. The fire control system was basically a mechanical analog computer. Yes, a mechanical one, linked with rangefinders, acoustic devices, and later, radar. It automatically calculated and sent aiming data to every gun connected in the network. The central command crew would track incoming aircraft, calculate their speed, altitude, and heading, and then feed that data directly into the guns. It was a level of coordination that seemed almost futuristic for the time. The idea was to predict exactly where the aircraft would be by the time the shell reached its altitude. Remember, depending on the target's height, those shells could take more than 20 seconds to reach the interception point. So, the math had to be perfect. The Allies, on the other hand, eventually developed proximity fuses, advanced fuses that could detect when a plane was nearby and automatically detonate the shell at just the right moment. That changed the game for them. But Germany never managed to create effective proximity fuses of its own, so they stuck with time fuses throughout the war. Even so, the Flak batteries were terrifyingly effective. A single battery could unleash a storm of steel into the sky, and even if the accuracy wasn't perfect, sheer volume guaranteed results. Early in the war, it took about 4,000 shells to bring down one bomber. Later, as the Allies introduced radar countermeasures and electronic jammers, it jumped to 16,000 shells per kill. Still, the 88 was unavoidable, and it was feared. Hundreds of Allied bombers never made it home because of flak. Thousands of airmen were killed or forced to bail out, often captured over German-held territory. But it was a deadly job on both sides. Flak batteries became priority targets for Allied bombers and fighter bombers, which made survival rates brutally low. The 88 had a muzzle velocity of around 2,700 feet per second and could reach aircraft flying at altitudes of up to 26,000 feet, more than enough to hit most Allied bombers. It had a flat trajectory and remarkable long-range accuracy, which would soon make it even more infamous when turned against ground targets. It also had a surprisingly high rate of fire, up to 20 rounds per minute, thanks to its semi-automatic sliding block breech. After each shot, the gun recoiled and automatically ejected the spent casing. The loader could insert a new round instantly, and the gun could even fire automatically upon reloading. Each 88mm shell weighed just under 10 kilograms, containing about 1 kilogram of explosive material inside a steel casing designed to fragment violently on detonation. Those black puffs you see in old war footage? That's the 88's handiwork, each burst scattering roughly 10,000 deadly fragments at high speed across a 10 to 15-meter radius. Remember, most bombers back then were aluminum-skinned, with only light armor around critical areas like the cockpit or fuel tanks. A flak burst anywhere near them could shred them apart. Later in the war, heavier flak guns were introduced, like the 10.5 centimeter and the massive 12.8 centimeter cannons. Their shells weighed 15 and even 26 kilograms, packing double or triple the explosive power of the 88. They were rarer, but when they fired, the results were devastating. But here's where things take an unexpected turn. How did this anti-aircraft cannon, built to shoot down planes, end up becoming one of the most feared tank killers ever made? At the start of the war, Germany dominated the skies. Their Luftwaffe reigned supreme over Europe, meaning flak batteries often sat idle with little to shoot at. Meanwhile, German forces encountered a new problem on the ground: heavy Allied tanks like the French Char B-1 and the British Matilda II. The standard German anti-tank guns at the time, 37mm and even 50mm calibers, couldn't penetrate their armor. So, in moments of desperation, commanders called in the 80s. What happened next shocked everyone. During the Battle of Arras in North Africa, British forces launched a surprise armored counterattack against General Rommel's 7th Panzer Division. His lighter tanks were getting pushed back fast, and it looked like the entire position was about to collapse. In that desperate moment, Rommel gave the order, lower the barrels and fire at the advancing British tanks. The 80s unleashed their fury. The British armor didn't stand a chance. The shells tore through tanks one after another, and within minutes, the attack was crushed. That battle proved beyond any doubt that the 88 wasn't just an anti-aircraft gun, it was a monster anti-tank weapon. The high muzzle velocity, extreme accuracy, and flat trajectory, combined with top-tier German optics, made it the perfect desert sniper. And later, on the Eastern Front, it would become just as deadly. The Germans soon developed special armor-piercing rounds, the Panzergeschoss 39 and 40, with explosive fillers designed to detonate inside the tank after penetration. These could punch through up to 100 millimeters of armor at 2 kilometers. That was enough to destroy any Allied tank of the time. But when Germany invaded the Soviet Union, they got a rude awakening. The new Soviet heavy tanks, the KV-1s and the T-34s, were tough. Standard anti-tank guns barely scratched them, so once again the 80s were brought in. For a time, they were the only reliable way to stop Soviet armor. Still, 88 crews were prime targets. Fighter planes, bombers, snipers, and even infantry all hunted them down. To survive, the Germans had to adapt. They realized they needed protection and mobility, something to let the 88 unleash its power without being exposed. That led to a new version, the PA-K, short for Panzerkanone, or anti-tank cannon. This evolved version of the 88 was mounted on the new Tiger I tank, entering service in late 1942. If you know even a little about World War II history, you've heard about the Tiger's 88, the weapon Allied tankers feared the most. Later, tank destroyers like the Nashorn and the Elephant carried an even more powerful version, the PK-43. These vehicles had their mechanical problems, but their guns were unmatched. Both Axis and Allied soldiers agreed. The 88 was the finest anti-tank weapon of the entire war. A single hit from a Tiger at over 2 kilometers could destroy any tank before it even spotted where the shot came from. Allied crews often reported the terrifying whistle of incoming shells before their tanks exploded. But even the best weapons can't win a war alone. Germany's production lines were crumbling, fuel was scarce, and Allied bombing campaigns were devastating the industrial heart of the Reich. By 1943, the skies over Germany were no longer safe. The Allies launched continuous, around-the-clock bombing raids targeting factories, cities, and military sites. Flak crews were now in constant battle, day and night. They were stationed around critical targets, meaning they were also sitting ducks for retaliation. Allied bombers began dropping flak suppression bombs, time-fused cluster munitions that exploded above suspected gun positions, raining steel down on the crews below. On top of that, low-flying fighter bombers strafed gun sites with rockets and machine gun fire. The casualty rate among flak crews skyrocketed to between 50% and 70%, and in the desperate final months of the war, it was even higher. Most flak batteries were hastily dug into open fields or small earthworks, offering little protection. But in major cities, the Germans built something massive, Flaktürme, or flak towers. These things were part anti-aircraft fortress, part civilian bunker. Each tower complex was a concrete giant, with walls nearly 3 meters thick, tough enough to withstand direct hits from 500-kilogram bombs. Inside, they had ammo storage, hospitals, shelter areas, food supplies, and communication rooms. They weren't just gun platforms, they were fortresses. Each major flak tower mounted 4 twin 12.8-centimeter guns, supported by 80s, and surrounded by 37mm and 20mm automatic cannons for low-altitude defense. They could fire massive salvos that lit up the sky like a storm of steel and fire. 8 major flak tower complexes were built, in Berlin, Hamburg, and Vienna. They were among the most fortified structures Germany ever made, and when the Allies advanced, these towers became last-stand strongholds. Some resisted until the very end. Even today, a few of them still stand, silent, weathered, and scarred, reminders of the scale of destruction they once unleashed. Some have even been transformed into museums or modern cultural spaces, their concrete walls still echoing with the memory of the war. The 88mm cannon was more than just a gun. It was a symbol of precision, of fear, and of the brutal efficiency of war. It was the weapon that ruled both sky and ground, that turned from defender to hunter, and that became a legend feared by all who faced it. And in the end, even as Germany fell, the 88 remained a masterpiece of engineering, a weapon decades ahead of its time. So, what do you think? Was the German 88 the most legendary gun of World War II, or just the most terrifying? Drop your thoughts down below and let me know which weapon you'd like to see covered next. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more incredible war stories, and I'll see you in the next one.